Shalom, brothers and sisters, shalom. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Trumpet's Call. I'm Maria. I pray that you are holding on to faith and holding on to hope during these times. Thank you for joining me for another lesson on the channel. Today's lesson is really more instructional, more historical, and I'd like to thank Brother Deshaun for sending these files to me about the Christian Black Codes of 1724. And so we're going to go over some of these today. I don't think we're going to make it through all of them, but if not, and if there's interest, we can have a part two regarding these codes. And so these are just some codes that were passed in the 1700s to restrict, limit, and control the movement of our people in the Americas. And so I wanted to go over them because these are Christian codes. And so this is not only linked with white supremacy, but also linked with Christianity. And so let's see some of the things that were allowed or disallowed for our people during that time. And so we're going to begin with number one, the Christian Black Codes. Here, I'll just read this description. The Christian Black Codes of 1724 were initiated during Reconstruction after the Civil War to control blacks after they were emancipated. Okay, so the codes were written in 1724, but they were really initiated during the time of Reconstruction when our people were set free, so to speak, but then they were enslaved with a new kind of slavery. Passed by Southern whites, instead of giving blacks the same rights as white people, the codes limited the blacks' freedom severely. They included that blacks had to be in service of a white person, that they could not have congregations together, that they could not speak out, and that they could not have weapons. They also included that blacks could not go out without a white supervisor. Thus, blacks had to take on the religions and holidays and gods of their white superiors. These same black codes were said to have been made null and void with the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865, although many southern states adopted black codes to keep former slaves from voting and imposed other restrictions. The 14th and 15th Amendments were supposedly designed or were to supposedly had eliminated these codes, but as you read them below and study the law of the land in conjunction with religion and politics, you'll discover these codes have been modernized in a disguise, and many are still in effect. So the Black Codes of 1724. Article 1 decrees the expulsion of Jews from the colony. So we know who the Jews or the Yahudim are. So any of those people who were Yahudim and openly Yahudim in the colonies, they were expelled. They had to leave. Article number 2, they make it imperative on masters to impart religious instruction to their slaves. I wonder what religion that was. Article 3 permits the exercise of the Roman Catholic's creed only. Every other mode of worship is prohibited. So only the Roman Catholic Christian creed, no other form of worship was allowed. Article 4, Negroes placed under the direction or supervision of any other person other than a Catholic are liable to confiscation. Wow. Okay then. Yeah, I think we're seeing a theme here. Article 5, Sundays and holy days or holidays are to be strictly observed. All Negroes found at work on these days are to be confiscated. So I suppose if these were enacted after Reconstruction and the Negroes were supposed to be free, I suppose their confiscation means that they were no longer free? Is that what that means? That you lose your freedom if you don't observe Sunday or the other pagan holidays? Is that what that means? Interesting. Article 6. We forbid our white subjects of both sexes to marry with the blacks. It's interesting. The blacks. under penalty of being fined and subjected to some other arbitrary punishment. We forbid all curates, priests, or missionaries of our secular or regular clergy, and even our chaplains in our Navy to sanction such marriages. We also forbid all of our white subjects and even our manumitted or freeborn blacks to live in a state of concubinage with slaves. Okay, I guess it means living together without being married. Should there be any issue from this kind of intercourse, it is our will that the person so offending and the master of the slave should pay each a fine of 300 livres. Should said issue be the result of concubinage of the master, his slave, said master shall not pay the fine. Oh, really? That's interesting. But be deprived of the slave and of the children, who shall be adjudged to the hospital of the locality, and said slave shall be forever incapable of being set free. Okay, so let's punish the slave. But shall this illicit intercourse have existed between a free black and his slave, when said slave, according to the forms described by the church, said slave shall become free and legitimate. In such case, there shall be no application of the penalties mentioned in the present article. Okay, how fair of them. Article 7. The ceremonies and forms prescribed by the Ordinance of the Blois and by the Edict of 1691 for marriage shall observe both with regard to free persons and slaves, but the consent of the father and mother of the slave is not necessary. That of the master shall be the only one required. Oh my word. So the mother and father, it means nothing. You only need the master's permission. Article 8. We forbid all curates to process and to effect marriages between slaves without the proof of the consent of their master. And we also forbid all masters to force their slaves into marriages against their will. Okay, all right. Article 9. Children issued from the marriage of slaves shall follow the condition of the parents and shall belong to the master of the wife and not of the husband, if the husband and the wife have different masters. Oh my gosh. I can't believe they thought to think these things through to this matter to determine who gets which slave if the slaves have different masters. It's just, oh my gosh. Article 10. If the husband of a slave and the wife of a free woman, it is our will that their children, or whatever sex they be, shall share the condition of the mother and be as free as she, notwithstanding the servitude of their father. And if the father be free and the mother a slave, then the children shall be slaves. Okay, let me read that again. If the father is free and the mother is a slave, then the children be slave. If the husband be a slave and the wife be a free woman, it is our will that the children shall share the condition of the mother. Okay, that's a little confusing. Article 11. Masters shall have their Christian slaves buried in consecrated ground. Article 12. We forbid slaves to carry offensive weapons or heavy sticks under the penalty of being whipped and of having said weapons confiscated for the benefit of the person seizing the same. An exception is made in favor of those slaves who are hunting or are shooting for their masters, and who carry with them a written permission to that effect, or are being designated by some known mark or badge. Okay, not even a stick. Can't even carry a heavy stick without having permission. Article 13. We forbid slaves belonging to different masters to gather in crowds either by day or by night under the pretext of a wedding or for any other cause, either at the dwelling or on the grounds of one of their masters or elsewhere, unless on the highways or in secluded places, under the penalty of corporal punishment, which shall not be less than the whip. In case of frequent offenses of the kind, the offender shall be branded with the mark of the Fleur de Lis, the Fleur de Luce. Isn't that the symbol of the football team? And should there be aggravating circumstances, capital punishment may be applied at the discretion of the judges. We command, as if they're God, we command all of our subjects, be they officials or not, to seize offenders, to arrest and conduct them to prison, although there should be not judgment against them. So they don't want us congregating. Are they afraid that we're going to start crying out to our Elohim, or they're afraid that we're going to start plotting and scheming and escape? I wonder why they're not allowed to congregate. Article 14. Masters who shall be convicted of having permitted or tolerated such gatherings as aforesaid, composed of other slaves than their own, shall be sentenced individually to indemnify their neighbors for the damages occasioned by said gatherings, and pay for the first time a fine of 30 livres, and double that sum on the repetition of the offense. So if you allow your slaves to congregate and somehow they damage your neighbor's property, the master is responsible. Okay. Article 15. We forbid Negroes to sell any commodities, provisions, or produce of any kind without the written permission of their masters, or without wearing their known marks or badges. So apparently they must have given them marks. Our people must have been marked in some way. And any persons purchasing anything from Negroes in violation of this article shall be sentenced to pay a fine of 1,500 livres. Okay, so they are banning our people at this point from engaging in commerce, engaging in trade. So if we grow vegetables, we're not allowed to sell them unless we get permission. And I suppose if you go and you ask your master for permission, he may grant it, but he may say, I'll take 50% of what you earn or more. Articles 16, 17, and 18 and 19 provide at length for the clothing of slaves and for their subsistence. Okay, talks about clothing of slaves. Okay, Article 20. Slaves who shall not be properly fed, clad, and provided for by their masters may give information thereof to the Attorney General of the Superior Council, or to all the officers of an inferior jurisdiction, and may put the written exposition of their wrongs into the hands upon which information, and even ex officio, shall the information come from another quarter. The Attorney General shall prosecute said masters without charging any cost to the complainant. It is our will that this regulation be observed in all accusations for crimes or barbarous and inhumane treatment brought by slaves against their masters. What about being a slave? Is that an inhumane treatment? Okay, so you can take them to court for not giving you proper clothes, but you can't take them to court for making you a slave? It's just insane. Article 21. Slaves who are disabled from working either by old age, disease, or otherwise, be the disease incurable or no, shall be fed and provided for by their masters. And in case they should have been abandoned by said masters, said slave shall be adjudged to the nearest hospital, to which said master shall be obliged to pay 8 cents a day for food and maintenance of each one of these slaves, and for the payment of this sum, said hospital shall have a lien on the plantation masters. Okay, so they're making them take care of their old slaves. Okay, Article 22. We declare that slaves have no right to any kind of property, but that all that they acquire either by their own industry or by the ability of others or by any other means or title whatever shall be the full property of their masters and the children of said slaves. their fathers, mothers, their kindred, or other relation, either free or slave, shall have no pretensions or claims thereto, either through testamentary, nor positions or donations inter vivisse, which depositions and donations we declare null and void, and also whatever promise they may have entered into by persons incapable of disposing anything and or participating to any contract. They don't want us to have a thing. That's just like Esau. They don't want us to have a thing. You have no right to any kind of property, whether you earned it by your own industry, your own hard work. You're not allowed. Article 23. Masters shall be responsible for what their slaves have done by their command, and also for what transactions they have permitted their slaves to do in their shops, in the particular line of commerce with whom they were entrusted. And in case said slave should have acted without order or authorization of the masters, said master shall be responsible only for so much as turned to their profit. Yeah. And if said masters have not profited by the dining or transaction of the slaves, per curiam, which the masters have permitted to the slave to own, shall be subjected to all claims against said slaves, after deductions, of course, made by the masters of what may be due them. And if said per curiam should consist in whole or part of merchandises in which the slaves had permission to traffic, the master shall only come in for their share in common with the creditors. Okay, you got to make sure they get theirs, right? Yeah. Article 24. Slaves shall be incapable of all public functions and of being constituted agents for any other persons than their own masters, with powers to manage or conduct any kind of trade. Nor can they serve as arbitrators or experts, nor shall they be called to give their testimony, either in civil or criminal cases, except when it shall be a matter of necessity, and only in default of white people. But in no case shall they be permitted to serve as witness either for or against their masters. Okay. Slaves shall never be parties to civil suits, either as plaintiffs or defendants, nor shall they be allowed to appear as complainants in criminal cases, but their masters shall have the right to act for them in civil matters and in criminal ones, to demand punishment and reparations for such outrages and excesses their slaves may have suffered from. So the master is entitled to reparations that the slave may have suffered, but the slave himself, herself, is not entitled to reparations that he has suffered under the hands of his master. Article 26. Slaves may be prosecuted criminally without their master being made parties to the trial, except they should be indicted as accomplices, and said slaves shall be tried at first by the judges of ordinary jurisdiction, if there be any, and on appeal by the Superior Council, with the same rules, formalities, and proceedings observed for free persons, save the exceptions mentioned hereafter. Articles 27 through 32 were not immediately available. Okay, I wonder what happened to those. Article 33. Slaves who shall have made themselves liable to the penalty of the whip, the Fleur de Luce, I'm almost certain this is the Fleur de Lis that they're talking about. It's the symbol of the Drew Brees used to be the quarterback. The Saints, that's what it is, the Saints. They have this symbol of the Fleur de Lis, and I happen to know that the Fleur de Lis, based on research, is a symbol or a brand that they would brand slaves for ownership. And I'm wondering if this Fleur de Luce that they're mentioning here is the same thing as the Fleur de Lis. I'll have to look it up. Okay, so the Fleur de Lis, or the Fleur de Luce brand, and ear cutting shall be tried in last resort by the ordinary judges of the inferior court, and shall undergo the sentence passed upon them without there being an appeal to the Superior Council in confirmation or reversal of judgment, notwithstanding the Article 26 of the present code, which shall be applicable only to those judgments in which the slave is sentenced to be hamstrung, or to suffer death. Hamstrung. Article 34. Freed or born free Negroes who shall have afforded refuge in their houses to fugitive slaves shall be sentenced to pay the masters of said slaves the sum of 30 livres a day for every day during which they shall have concealed said fugitives, and all other free persons guilty of the same offense shall pay a fine of 10 livres per day as aforesaid, and should the freed or freeborn Negroes not be able to pay the fines herein specified, they shall be reduced to the condition of slaves and sold as such. Should the price of the sale exceed the sum mentioned in the judgment, the surplus shall be delivered to the hospital. Oh my goodness. So if you provide refuge for a fellow Hebrew in your house and you're caught, they're going to fine you. And if you don't have the money to pay the fine, then they sell you. And then whatever excess they get for you goes to the hospital, but you're still a slave. Article 35. We permit our subjects in this colony, who may have slaves concealed in any place whatever, to have them sought after by such persons in such ways as they deem proper, so to proceed themselves to such researches as they think best. So they can search out in any way they think or any way they deem necessary to try to find slaves who may be hiding, whatever they think is best. Article 36. The slave who was sentenced to suffer death on the denunciation of his master shall, when that master is not an accomplice to the crime, be appraised before his execution by 2 of the principal inhabitants of the locality, who shall be especially appointed by the judge, and the amount of said appraisement shall be paid to the master, to raise this sum, and shall be collected by the persons invested with what authority. Okay? Article 37. We forbid all the officers of the Superior Council and all other officers of the justice in the colony to take any fees or receive any prerequisites in criminal suits against slaves under the penalty, in so doing, being dealt with as guilty of extortion. Okay? Article 38. We also forbid all of our subjects in this colony, whatever their condition or rank may be, to apply on their own private authority to the rack to their slaves under any pretenses whatsoever, and to mutilate said slaves in any one of their limbs or any part of their bodies under the penalty of confiscation of said slave, and master so offending shall be liable to a criminal to put their slaves in irons and to have them whipped with rods or ropes. Okay, I'm going to have to read that again. We also forbid all of our subjects in this colony, whatever their condition or rank be, to apply on their private authority the rack to their slaves. So they're not allowed to apply the rack. And the rack, as I understand it, is some sort of torture device. So they're not allowed to do that to their slaves under any pretenses whatsoever on their own private property. They're also not allowed to mutilate the slaves in any of their limbs or any other part of their bodies under the penalty that the slave could be confiscated and taken away from them. And masters who offend in this manner shall be liable essentially for a criminal act, to put their slaves in irons and to have them whipped with rods or ropes. So they're not allowed to put their slaves in irons or they have them whipped with rods or ropes. Wow, that's really interesting because we've seen many a movie where these things are happening. So I guess they didn't enforce these penalties very often. Article 39. We command our officers of justice in this colony to institute criminal process against masters and overseers who shall kill or mutilate their slaves, when in their power and under their supervision, and to punish said murder according to the atrocities of the circumstances, and in case the offenses shall be pardonable one. We permit them to pardon said master and overseer without being necessary to obtain from us letters patent of pardon. Oh, they're quick to pardon each other, apparently. Yeah, it's against the law to kill your slave, but if you kill your slave, we're going to give you a letter of pardon. Article 40. Slaves shall be held in law as movables, and as such, they shall be part of the community of acquests between husband and wife. I guess it's like acquisitions. They shall be seized under mortgage whatever. They shall be equally divided among their co-heirs without admitting from any one of said heirs any claim found on the precipit. Okay, so it's essentially slaves is like property, and it gets divided between the husband and wife, kind of like the silver or the dining room furniture. Okay. Oh, precipiture of right of primogeniture or of dowry. Okay, so they take those things into account. Okay. Articles 41 and 42 have been removed. Entirely relative, they've been relative to judicial forms and proceedings. Article 43, husbands and wives shall not be seized and sold separately when belonging to the same master. And their children, whom under 14 years of age, shall not be separated from their parents, and such seizures and sales shall be null and void. The present article shall apply to voluntary souls, and as such, I think there are some typos in this, cases, sales should take away the violation of the law. The seller shall be deprived of the slave he has illegally retained, and said slave shall be adjudged to the purchase without any additional. Okay, so I think they're trying to be just by not allowing slaves younger than 14 to be sold away from their parents. Slaves 14 years old from this age up to 60 who are settled on lands and plantations and are at present working on them shall not be liable to seizure for debt, except for what may be due out of the purchase money agreed to be paid for them, unless said grounds or plantation should be distressed and seized for judicial sale of real estate, without including the slaves of the aforesaid age who are part of the said estate, shall be deemed null and void. I guess it's just occurring to me right now that slaves were considered part of their estate. Like if you had to sell off part of your inheritance because you owed someone, that slaves would be included in that, except slaves age 14 to 60. That's what they're saying in this article. Okay, articles 45 through 49 are to be observed in judicial proceedings. Article 50. Masters, when 25 years old, shall have the power to manumit their slaves. Okay, I wonder why they didn't do that more often. When you're 25 years old, as a master, you have the right to set your slaves free, either by testamentary dispositions or by acts of inter vivace. But, as there may be mercenary masters disposed to set a price on the liberation of their slaves, and there are slaves with a view to acquire the necessary means to purchase their freedom, may be tempted to commit theft or deeds of plunder, no matter to set his slaves free, without obtaining the superior council a degree of permission to that effect, which permission shall be granted without cost when the motive for setting free of said slaves as specified in the petition of the master shall appear legitimate to the tribunal. Okay, so if you decide you want to set your slaves free, you have to get permission from the tribunal, and they have to approve your reasons for doing so. So if you say, I've had a change of heart, I've decided that owning another human being really isn't good or just, and I'm going to be judged for that, they may say, that makes me feel guilty, that makes me feel bad, so we're not going to allow you to do that. Interesting. All future acts for the emancipation of slaves freed shall not be entitled to their freedom. They shall be taken away from their former masters and confiscated for the benefit of the India Company. Okay, yeah, because you wouldn't want someone setting someone free and setting a precedent, right? Article 51. However, slaves should be appointed by their masters tutors to their children. Said slave shall be held and regarded as being set free to all intent and purposes. Article 52. We declare that the acts for the wrong word, even though that's what's happening here. They are being disenfranchised. We declare that the acts for the enfranchisement of slaves passed according to the forms above described shall be equivalent to an act of naturalization. When said slaves are not born in our colony of Louisiana, this is in Louisiana. Now I'm sure that symbol is a Fleur de Lis, the same symbol on the saint's uniform. That is a slave symbol, the Fleur de Lis. And shall enjoy all the rights and privileges inherent to our subjects born in our kingdoms or any land or colony under our dominion. Look at the language here. Kingdoms and colonies and dominions and tribunals. We declare, however, that all manumitted slaves and all freeborn Negroes are incapable of receiving donations, either by testamentary dispositions or by acts inter vivos from whites, so whites can't give blacks gifts. Said donation shall be null and void, and the objects of said donation shall be applied to the benefits of, guess where? The nearest hospital. Oh gosh. Article 53. We commend all manumitted slaves to show the profoundest respect to their former masters, to their widows and children, and any injury or insult offered by said manumitted slaves to their former masters, their widows, or their children shall be punished with more severity than if it had been offered to any other person. We, however, declared them exempt from the discharge of all duties or services, and from payment of all taxes or fees, or anything else in relation to their persons, to their personal or real estate, either during the life or after the death of said slave. Article 54. We grant manumitted slaves the same rights, privileges, immunities which are enjoyed by freeborn persons. It is our pleasure that their merit in having acquired their freedom shall produce in their favor, not only with regards to their persons, but also their property, the same effects which our other subjects derive from the happy circumstances of having been born free. In the name of the king, and then it has the family there. March 1724. Wow. To actually sit and write all of these things out and think these things through about how you're going to legally enslave another human being and how you're going to justify all of the actions that you commit against them. It's just something that's completely other to me. I can't understand it nor process it. But wicked is as wicked does. To borrow a line from Forrest Gump. Wicked is as wicked does. And the Most High saw every pain. He saw every bit of mistreatment. And he saw how they also broke their own laws and did sell babies away from their mothers and their children and their fathers, and did split up husbands and wives. They even broke their own laws. They had the laws, but they didn't keep them. They did lock our ancestors up in chains. They did put them on the rack. They did do the things to them that they said they wouldn't do. They make their own rules, and then they lie, and then they break their own rules. And the Most High will judge. He certainly will judge. Well, once again, I want to thank Brother Deshaun for sending me the black codes. I told him that I would look into them, and I thought I'd just share them with you. I hadn't heard of them before. And so you can see how some of these black codes are really still in effect today, and how they affect the way that our people are able to conduct business and are able to freely move about in this world. You can see how these things are affected in a great way. But the Most High will judge. He will judge. So thank you once again, brothers and sisters, for joining me on the channel. And this has been a different kind of video for me. I just wanted to share this, these black codes. And I think that it's something that we need to be thinking about, because the things that we're seeing here, at least in some way, if not worse, will be done to those who have done these things to us. Because you do reap where you sow. And so there's a whole lot of reaping about to happen. So I pray the Most High would Baruch and keep you, brothers and sisters. I pray that He would make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. I pray that He would lift up His countenance upon you and grant you shalom, peace. And just know, weeping endures for a night, but joy comes. Joy comes in the new dawn and the new day. And a new day is just about to dawn. Be blessed, brothers and sisters. Shalom and shalom.